What's up guys, and welcome back to another Revit Tools video. In this video we'll be covering the Override Graphics and View tool. It's quite a mouthful for a simple tool, but basically what this tool does is it takes an element that you've selected, be it one element or a ton of different kinds of elements, and it graphically overrides them. So there's a number of different overrides that we can use to affect certain elements. So as a tutorial, I will go in and let's just look at this wall here. So if I select the wall, I now have this tool available to me. You can see the icon now shows color. If I click it, I see override by element, override by category, and finally override by filter. So overriding by element is overriding all the elements I've selected, and that's it. So in this case, it's just that one wall. Override by category will affect every element of that particular category of the selection. So in this case, I've selected a wall in the wall category. So if I choose override by category, the result will be that the entire category of walls in this view is affected by the override. An override by filter is something completely different. I have a completely separate video for filters. It's a bit long-winded, but still check it out. It's probably worth watching. The override by filter I'll show you at the end of the video. So right now I've got this wall selected. I'm going to choose override by element, and you're presented with this long, almost exhaustive looking list of different ways you can override. I will bring these down and first explain what all of these are first, so we can begin to get an idea of what to expect when we start to override this wall. So first of all, visible. I can simply uncheck visible, hit apply, and the wall goes away. This is hiding the wall essentially. I don't want to do that in this case because I want to graphically override it, do interesting things with it. So I'll bring it back. By default, everything's visible. That's what you want. You also have the option of half-toning. We all know what half-toning is. It's everything goes to halfway between black and white. It's all grayed out in the background. I don't want to do that necessarily. So now we have projection lines, surface pattern, surface transparency, cut lines, and cut patterns. All of these that can be overrode at once, and it can get crazy if you want it to get crazy, or it doesn't have to be. So first of all, what are projection lines? Projection lines are basically the edges of elements. So in the case of a wall, it's going to be the top and the bottom of the wall. In the case of these chairs over here, maybe imagine you're in a plan view, you're looking straight down, and all the edges of all the parts of that chair model will be considered projection lines. So surface patterns, what are surface patterns? It's basically every face. So the face of this wall, the top face of that wall is considered a surface pattern. But you could also use the paint tool to determine what a surface might be. Not every time can you paint on every surface, but if you can paint on it, that's a surface. Surface transparency, that's pretty simple. You can make the entire element, in this case the surface, which in a way is the entire element, transparent more or less. Cut lines, so they're similar to projection, but it's if you actually were to be cutting through an element, you get different kinds of lines. So instead of affecting the edge, they're like the internal edges of an element. If you want to remember it that way, they're the internal edges of an element. And cut patterns, very similar to surface patterns, but they are only activated once you have an element you're cutting through, so they're almost the surface patterns of a cut element, the cut portion of an element. So again, I've got that wall selected, and because I've hit apply, you can't tell that, but it is selected. And so I'll go to projection lines, and the different options I have here are pattern, which is basically selecting a line. Do I want to change the types of lines that are the projection lines? In this case, I can, but I don't really care about that so much. For example purposes, I'll probably just end up using red all over to highlight in bold like what is actually changing and what the red is doing and where it's affected. So in this case, I'll change the color to red. And the only thing that will change, because I haven't changed the pattern or the line weight of all the edges or projection lines of that wall, is that they'll turn red. So I'll hit apply, and you can see all the edges of that wall turn red. Now I can also start changing the line weight, can bolden this up a bit. You can keep going to where it gets insane. But if you put by object style and by object style here, it will basically be the default that you have set for these types of lines in your visibility graphics. So there's projection lines. I'll hit reset, apply. Now let's move on to surface patterns. We've all seen these before, but starting in Revit 2019, we now have a foreground and a background surface pattern. Before, in 2018, you just had one surface pattern. It was kind of a pain, but there's a lot more that you can do with two different patterns. So again, I'm not going to go crazy with this, I don't need to, but I'm going to change this to red, the foreground, and the second I do that, I'm going to hit apply. I'm going to see that that red was applied to the foreground. So now that I've made that red, and by material is the pattern, so by default, I don't have any pattern set to this. It's going to default to the material of the wall. So maybe the wall has a specific type of surface pattern. It's going to refer to that material that's applied to the wall. So in this case, I want to use a solid fill. I want it to be completely red. So I hit apply, that's how I get it. And you can tell that you're not cutting through this wall because the top of the wall is red. The surface pattern, again, remember the surface is the entire outer shell of an element. So I'm going to reset that, and you can apply any sort of background that you want. I don't really necessarily need to, but I can. Maybe I'll make this one big Christmas wall, do a green crosshatch, I'll hit apply. And of course we can't see it because the background is green and the foreground is an entire solid fill of red. So to do that, to actually see the green, we'd have to put this information in the foreground. I wish there was a quick way of doing that, like switching the foreground and background, but unfortunately in Revit there's not. So I'll go ahead and change these real quick so we can see both of these working together. So there we go. If I hit OK and zoom in, I can see I have that red background that's solid along with the green crosshatch that's in the foreground. So again, I'll select the wall, I'm going to override the element, I'm going to reset everything, I'll hit apply, and now let's look at surface transparency. And again, if you remember, surface transparency is going to apply transparent or make the surface more transparent. So right now it's set to 0, which is fully opaque, so I can't see through any of it at all. And if I put it up to 100%, we should be able to see everything all the way through it. Now, this is another way of helping you understand what projection lines are, because if you were to put the surface transparency to 100%, the only thing we should be left with are projection lines. So let's test that out. I'm gonna hit apply right now, and so we can see all the way through it. We've got those surface pattern lines which are left, but the dark bold lines are our projection lines, and we can test that with changing the color of the projection lines to red, and we can see the edges of that wall become red. And again, you can go anywhere between 100 and 0, fully opaque to fully transparent, and you can get different levels of here. This is a good way of presenting specific objects if you need to see through them. Anyways, I'll hit reset, hit apply, looking at cut lines. Now, if I were to change the cut lines right now, we would not see any difference at all. And that's because this wall is not being cut through. There's no, we're basically able to see it all. And to get around that, let's check our section box here to turn that on. I'll select the section box and I'll bring it down just a bit so we can start cutting through things. So I'll zoom in on this wall, and you'll know you're cutting through it if you can see the interior parts of that wall. So if I click on the wall and I go to edit type and then edit structure, you can start to see all these elements. I'll bring this in a bit, show the preview, and see, there are all the elements. You can see that they're very similar, or actually they're the same. They're the exact same elements that show up there when we cut it. So that's great, it's working. Now we can go to our override element, and cut lines. And so I'm going to change those to red. I'll hit apply, and every line that is cut, or every line that is a line that is cut, so a part of the cut itself, is turned red. And that, we know it's working that way. We know that it's cut that way because we've set the cut lines to be red, and we can see that they're obviously red. So by default, you can see the edges, or just edges of the wall, edges of the cut are more bold, and that's just a default thing. Now we could go here and change the line weight of those all to 1. If we want every line to be 1, maybe we could change them to be something bold. And it's only affecting the outer lines, and that's just the way it is. It's the cut lines of the wall, so the cut of the wall isn't necessarily treating the internal parts of the wall to be a part of the cut, because the cut is just the edges. So that's just something to remember as well. And you can change the pattern as well if we want to make these dashed with a 3 line weight. We can see everything becomes dashed. Line weight for the different parts is affected, but just not the color, or just not the weight. You can change the pattern type, but if I change this all to 1, you can see just the edges go. So anyways, I'll hit reset, hit apply, and now we're left with the basic cut again. So finally, the cut pattern. This is going to act very similarly to the surface patterns. You get the same options here. You get a foreground and a background. I'll first change the background to like a concrete, and let's make that red. So it will be the red, just like in this preview here, the red of the concrete. The red will be part of the concrete. The only thing you're going to get red is like that concrete hatch pattern, which is what we want in this case. So I'll hit apply, and you can see it right there. It's working. I could go into the foreground and do something else. It doesn't matter. I'll make a brick, change that to a purple, hit OK, and we can see that that's working as well. Hit OK. I'll turn thin lines on, and we can start to see that a little better right there. And so now I'm going to click on the wall one last time, go into element, I'll reset it, and get it back to where we were. So perfect. That's everything. And so I'll click on the element again, and that was everything that had to do with overriding the element itself. Now, I could have done that same thing, selecting 40 different elements, or 2, or 5, it doesn't matter. So I could select random elements now, all of different types, and start to change all of these elements. So let's change the surface pattern to red, and we'll make that a solid. And I'll change the projection. I'll hit apply there first, so we see all these elements' surfaces turned red. So you can see the surface of that chair. So now I'll change the projection lines to solid. I'll make that a blue, and maybe put that at 3, a line weight of 3, so we can see them all. So the projection lines, again, the edges, you see that all the edges of that wall, or that chair, are now blue. And we can't see the edges of the wall, the top of the wall, because it's being cut. Same with the door, we only see the side edges. I'll turn thin lines off so we can get a better idea of this. So you can start to see the edges there, they're blue. So unfortunately, there's not a great way of resetting all these elements, because you have to select them all. Like if I had to select this, I could select that element, override by element, and then reset it that way. Or if you've got a bunch of different overrides and all kinds of elements, you can select everything. I'll go to the paintbrush and then just reset. So right now you see there's when these are whited out, I guess you can say whited out, there's no real option. That's basically saying there's different overrides going on for different elements, that doing different things at the same time. And so maybe we want to just reset everything. We can hit OK and everything's back to normal like we want. So I will again select this wall, and now I'm going to go override by category. Looking at that, it looks the exact same, and that's because it is. But because I didn't choose override by element and instead chose override by category, you can see up here category, that means that every element in this view that shares the same category as the element I selected will be affected by all of these overrides. So one way to show that off is if I go to surface patterns, I'm going to make this a solid fill and blue, or that's a red. Go to red, and because I have a wall selected, what I'm anticipating is that every category element that is wall, so every wall in this view, the surface pattern will turn red. Well, let's see if that works. Sure enough, it does. Every single wall is red. That's a very quick way of getting some overrides onto wall elements or any kind of elements that share the same category. So this is interesting too. If you go to visibility graphics over here, or VG, I like to hit VG, you can see that we've got some of the same overrides. In fact, they are the exact same overrides. You've got the projection, the surface, line, pattern, transparency, and the cut, lines and patterns. And when we scroll to the bottom, hey look, walls. It's the same override that I just made. And so you could click on all these, and it's just the same as clicking on that element and overriding my category. So you could also do it here in one big swoop if you wanted to by different categories. So that's great, something to remember. So I'm going to go select that wall, and maybe I want to reset that wall. I don't want the red on there anymore. I can go to override element, and you can see that I don't have anything filled out. There's nothing that's red. The surface pattern is not red, and that doesn't make sense because I can clearly see the surface pattern of that wall is red. Now, why is it not? Well, it's because I'm in the view specific element graphics, which means I'm trying to override this specific element, when in reality, what I did, if you remember, was I overrode by category. So if I go to override by category now, then you can see the red. And so if I want just this wall to be affected, I would have to, or if I want this wall to no longer be red, I would have to go back and reset this entire category. But maybe I don't want to do that. I can start getting kind of fishy with things and selecting this wall, overriding it by element, and maybe we want this to be blue instead. So change that to blue, hit OK, and apply, and that'll turn blue. So that's great. And now maybe I want to go into this wall, and I don't want all these red, so I can just reset that, hit OK, and because I overrode that element by element and not category, the blue will stay. So all that to say, you have to unoverride or turn the override off in either the element or category of however you turned it on. So basically, you've got to work backwards in the same way you applied the overrides. Just something to remember. So finally, the fun part, kind of fun part. I'll reset that element. So I've got this element selected. I'm going to now go override by filter. And again, I'm going to say I put out a filters video recently. It's very long-winded, but if you can handle it, I would recommend it. If you don't know much about filters, it's very helpful. It'll give you a nice overview over the different types of filters and what they can do and why you might use them in projects or whatever it might be. So I'm not going to go over that here, but instead I'm going to just show you what I can do as far as applying filters. So just like that tutorial before, I can add different filters that I have made. So I've got a couple examples, and I'll hit that. I'll add that example. I will choose that example. It's oddly enough, they're named examples, and this is a good example of why you should name things. Please name things. If you're using Revit, please name things. It's so hard to work in a professional world and look in your project browser and see copy 1, copy 1, copy 2, copy 3, and same with filters. In this case, this is my own fault. I made these 2 example filters. I don't know what the heck they do, and now I have to go and see what they're called because I didn't name them well. So I'll hit edit, then I'll see example, that's affecting the doors, and that's affecting doors greater than 2 feet wide and all this. Okay, great. So now I'll rename that to doors greater than 2 feet. How about that? That's nice. Of course, I can't use that character. Just put it at doors 2 feet. Okay, and what is this one doing? Hit edit, and I can see that that's with ceilings. Okay, ceilings greater than 100 square feet. All right, rename it. Name it there. Ceiling 100. Okay, so I don't have any ceilings in this view, so nothing will be affected. But in this case, we'll pay attention to the doors greater than 2 feet, because I've got a number of doors greater than 2 feet. In fact, I think all of them are. So this is a good example. So filters, resuming the whole override. Filters work the same way now. So I've added this filters, and if you remember filters, they're just looking at specific elements that I've determined. In this case, it's doors over 2 feet. So I can tell that that's visible. I don't want to hide them, so I'm going to keep it visible. And so I have the same overrides once again. And now I can change the projection lines of these doors. Maybe I want that to be a dot pattern and blue. So these are going to be the projection lines or edges of the door, projection lines, and surface patterns. Maybe I want that to be a red. I'll make that a solid fill. And I can hit OK now. So all the doors come back, and I can see that I've got these dash projection lines, so basically the edges of all parts of the door, and then the surface pattern's red. And it just so happens that all of these doors are greater than 2 feet. So let's change this door. Change this door here. If I can select a door, I apparently can't do that. Tab to the door. See, the door's 3 feet. Let's go into the properties, and I will make this a 1.5 foot door. Why you would do that, I don't know. Also, rename your types. In this case, making this 1.5. Hit OK. Once I do that, door width will change. And it's funny, why did that happen? I was anticipating that the filter would not show that. I anticipated that the override would not be applied to that filter, or to that door. So let's edit the filter again. Oh, it applies to this specific door type. So all I need to do is change that door type. So I can change this door type to, let's make this an overhead coiling door. That's great. And we'll make this one 1.5 foot wide, because that exists in the real world. We'll rename it, put it at 1.5. I'll have the width at 1.5 as well. I'll hit OK. And now we can see, yes, it looks jacked as hell, but it's okay. I have a door 1.5 foot wide. It does not apply to the filter because it's not greater than 2 feet, and it is not that type of door. So that was another long-winded way of saying how filter overrides work. Filter overrides work the same way, because you have the same overrides. It's just pointing at something specific. So I sure hope you learned something in that video, and I hope you enjoyed looking at me this time. Maybe you didn't. Definitely demolish that like button if you learned something. It always helps me. And please subscribe if you enjoyed this video, if you enjoyed any part of it. But definitely if you didn't, let me know why. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and thanks for watching.